Ambassador Vexthera, a creature of refined diplomacy and ancient lineage, had seen the rise and fall of empires, the delicate dance of interstellar trade, and the occasional, truly scandalous, interspecies romance that sent ripples through the galactic news feeds. Her 4 eyes, usually a calm, knowing emerald, were now wide with a mixture of exhaustion and disbelief. Never, in her 347 years of service to the Galactic Council, had she been summoned to an emergency meeting at 0300 Galactic Standard Time. The council chamber, typically a bastion of solemn decorum, was a chaotic menagerie of anxiety. 17 distinct species, each with their own unique physiology and communication methods, chattered and gesticulated in a cacophony of fear. The air, usually filtered to a pristine, neutral blend, was thick with the pheromones of stress and the acrid tang of burnt ambition. The Zephyrian crystalline war, a festering wound on the galactic psyche, had dragged on for 47 agonizing years. Everyone, it seemed, was weary of the endless conflict, the constant drain on resources, the grim tally of lives lost. Everyone, that is, except the Zephyrians and the crystallines themselves, who appeared perfectly content to continue their mutual annihilation indefinitely. Council Chairman Blocksnath, his breathing apparatus wheezing like a dying starship, broke through the din. Ambassador Vexthera, he rasped, his voice a strained whisper. We have a situation. Vexthera's eyes rolled in perfect, weary synchronization. Let me guess, she sighed, her voice a low, resonant hum. The peace talks collapsed again. The Zephyrians cling to their stolen mining rights. The crystallines demand reparations for decades of warfare. And somehow, it's fallen to me to mend this cosmic rift. She braced herself for the familiar litany of diplomatic failures, the endless cycle of accusations and counter-accusations. But Blocksnath's next words sent a chill through her ancient bones, a cold dread that eclipsed even the fear of planet-cracking weapons. Actually, he continued, his voice dropping to a grave murmur, it's far worse than that. They've both agreed to one final negotiation. 72 hours. If we can't broker peace by then, they're escalating to planet-cracking weapons. The chamber, which moments before had been a maelstrom of noise, fell into an unnatural, terrifying silence. The kind of silence that precedes a supernova. Planet-cracking weapons. The very phrase was a relic of a darker age, 1,000 years buried in the annals of galactic history. The last time such a device had been deployed, it had carved a chasm in a once vibrant world, leaving behind a tourist attraction that remained lethally radioactive to this day. Vexthera's diplomatic training, honed over centuries, warred with a primal, instinctual terror. So naturally, she said, her voice dripping with a sarcasm so potent it could corrode durasteel. You want me to perform a miracle, to convince 2 species who have been trying to genocide each other for nearly half a century to suddenly start sharing recipes and comparing vacation photos. Blocksnath, in his blissful ignorance, completely missed the sarcasm. That's the spirit, he declared, a flicker of hope in his weary eyes. But we're not sending you in alone. We've hired you the best bodyguard in the galaxy. Vexthera's antennae perked up, a faint spark of interest igniting within her. A Carinian battle monk? One of those cybernetic Nexus warriors. Her mind raced through the legendary protectors of the cosmos, the elite few capable of standing against impossible odds. Blocksnath consulted his data slate, a faint smile playing on his lips. Better, he announced, his voice filled with an almost unsettling pride. We got you a human. The silence that followed Blocksnath's pronouncement was so profound, so absolute, that one could have heard a pin drop in the vacuum of space itself. Then, as if a cosmic airlock had suddenly burst open, the chamber erupted. Not in panic, not in fear, but in a collective shriek of pure, unadulterated horror. A human? Counselor Pip-Era shrieked, her iridescent tentacles writhing in an agony of revulsion. Have you lost your collective minds? A chorus of terrified whispers rippled through the assembled delegates. They're from a death world. Someone hissed from the back, their voice trembling. They eat poison for recreation. another added, their tone laced with a morbid fascination. I heard they throw themselves off cliffs for fun, came a third, the words barely audible above the rising tide of hysteria. Vexthera stared at the council chairman, her diplomatic training, usually an impenetrable shield, now barely holding back a wave of primal dread. You want me to negotiate the most important peace treaty in galactic history, she managed, her voice strained, while being protected by a creature from a planet where literally everything is trying to kill everything else? Blocksnath, oblivious to the existential crisis unfolding around him, beamed. His name is Jake Murphy, he said proudly. He comes highly recommended. Very reasonable rates, too. If one had never encountered a human before, the sight of Jake Murphy would have been an experience. They were, for a galactic citizen of average height, tall enough to be subtly intimidating, yet not so towering as to require ducking through standard doorways. Their faces, however, were a marvel of unsettling flexibility, contorting into a bewildering array of expressions that were frankly terrifying to those unaccustomed to such overt emotional displays. And their teeth, those things designed for grinding up food, looked as though they could effortlessly shear through titanium. Jake Murphy was, at that very moment, ensconced in the council's opulent waiting area, casually devouring what appeared to be a sandwich. But this was no ordinary sandwich. This was a human sandwich, a culinary abomination that, to any other species, would have been a weapon of mass destruction. It contained enough capsaicin to incapacitate a small regalian, enough processed meat to induce anaphylactic shock in a vegan diplomat, and enough complex carbohydrates to send a Ketunian into a week-long coma. Ambassador Vexthera? Jake stood, extending a hand in what humans called a handshake. Vexthera stared at the appendage as if it were a live grenade, poised to detonate. I'm Jake Murphy. I'll be your bodyguard for this mission. Vexthera's diplomatic training, a fragile dam against the rising tide of her instincts, barely held. Yes, well, she managed, her voice a strained whisper. I'm sure you're very qualified for this position. Thanks, Jake said, taking another bite of his sandwich, a faint, unsettling smile playing on his lips. I gotta say, I'm pretty excited about this gig. I've never been to a peace negotiation before. Sounds way more interesting than my last job. What was your last job? Vexthera asked, the words escaping before she could stop them. She immediately regretted it. Oh, I was a kindergarten teacher. The silence that followed was even more profound than the one before. Finally, Vexthera managed, her voice barely a breath. You taught young humans? Yeah, 5-year-olds. Great kids. But man, they have so much energy. Always running around, climbing things, putting random objects in their mouths. You really have to keep your eyes on them. Vexthera's mind reeled. This creature, this human, had been responsible for controlling multiple young humans simultaneously. The most dangerous species in the galaxy, and he'd been managing their offspring in groups. The sheer, unadulterated horror of it was almost too much to bear. The job posting mentioned that you needed someone who could handle high-stress situations and wasn't afraid of a little conflict. Jake continued cheerfully, completely oblivious to the ambassador's internal meltdown. After dealing with 25 kids arguing over who gets to use the red crayon, I figure I can handle a couple of alien diplomats. You do realize, Vexthera said carefully, that you're considered the most dangerous creature in known space. Jake paused mid-chew. Me? Really? That's weird. I mean, I'm pretty harmless. I don't even eat meat on Mondays. You're from Earth, Vexthera pressed. A Class 12 Deathworld. Your planet is so dangerous that the Galactic Tourism Board requires a 17-page waiver just to visit your moon. Oh, that. Jake waved dismissively. Yeah, Earth's a little rough around the edges, but you get used to it. I mean, sure, we've got some poisonous plants and a few bitey animals, but it's not that bad. Just last week, I went hiking in the mountains and only ran into 2 bears. 2 bears? Yeah. Mama bear and her cub. Super cute. I kept my distance, of course. You don't want to get between a mother and her baby. Vexthera realized she was hyperventilating. This human had casually encountered 2 of Earth's apex predators and described them as cute. Anyway, Jake said, finishing his sandwich, When do we ship out? I packed light, just the essentials. He gestured to what appeared to be a small backpack. That's all you brought? Vexthra asked. Sure. I've got a change of clothes, some snacks, a first aid kit, and a few books. Oh, and my lucky multi-tool. Never know when you might need to fix something. He pulled out what looked like a small device that unfolded into at least 12 different implements, each of which looked like it could be used as a weapon in the right hands, which coincidentally were human hands. Right? Vexthra said weakly. Well, I suppose we should get going. The diplomatic transport is waiting. Awesome, Jake said, shouldering his pack. I've never been on a spaceship before. This is going to be fun. As they walked toward the docking bay, Vexthra couldn't shake the feeling that she was about to enter the most dangerous diplomatic mission in galactic history. And somehow the scariest thing about it was that her bodyguard thought it was going to be fun. The diplomatic transport ship, christened the Peaceful Endeavor, was a testament to galactic engineering, a marvel designed for the sole purpose of conveying important dignitaries safely through the most hostile reaches of space. It boasted triple redundant life support systems, military-grade shields capable of deflecting even a focused energy blast, and enough firepower to deter the most determined pirate fleet. What it conspicuously lacked, however, was a human-compatible food synthesizer. So, Jake said, settling into his luxuriously appointed seat, his eyes scanning the opulent cabin with an almost childlike wonder. This is pretty nice. Very spacious. On Earth, the longest flight I ever took was about 12 hours, and they crammed us in there like sardines. Captain Grixel, a grizzled Alterion with 2 decades of diplomatic transport experience etched onto his leathery face, nearly choked on his nutrient paste. Sardines? He rasped, his vocalizer struggling with the unfamiliar term. Oh, they're these little fish, Jake explained, completely oblivious to the captain's distress. We packed them really tightly in cans. Great on crackers. He then produced a small, cylindrical metal tin from his backpack. Want to try some? I brought extras. The entire bridge crew, a diverse collection of species from across the galaxy, took a collective, involuntary step backward. Vexthra, ever the diplomat, quickly intervened. That's very kind of you, Jake, she said, her voice strained. But I don't think our digestive systems are compatible with Earth food. No problem, Jake replied, his cheerful demeanor unwavering. He then proceeded to open the can with a device that looked suspiciously like a miniature, razor-sharp sword. More for me. The aroma that wafted from the opened can was, to put it mildly, indescribable. It was a pungent, oily, and vaguely metallic scent that immediately sent the ship's air filtration system into emergency overdrive, its vents hissing and whirring in a desperate attempt to purge the cabin of the alien odor. Jake, meanwhile, was happily consuming what appeared to be decomposed fish, his expression one of pure, unadulterated enjoyment. So, Jake said between bites, his voice muffled by the contents of his mouth, tell me about these folks we're meeting. The Zephyrians and the Crystallants. What's their deal? Vexthra, still reeling from the sardine incident, launched into a detailed explanation of the conflict. She spoke of the territorial disputes, the resource wars, the deep-seated cultural misunderstandings that had festered and escalated into outright genocide. Jake listened attentively, occasionally nodding or asking clarifying questions that, to Vexthra's surprise, were remarkably insightful. Wow, he said when she finally finished, a thoughtful expression on his face. 47 years of fighting over some mining rights and hurt feelings. That's rough. You know, we had something similar happen on Earth once. Well, okay, several times. But there was this one war that lasted 100 years. 100 years? Squeaked Navigator Pick, a small, multi-limbed creature whose eyes widened in disbelief. Yeah, the 100 Years' War, Jake confirmed. France and England. They fought over who got to be king of France. Took them a century to figure out that maybe they should just let the French decide for themselves. And how did it end? Vexthra asked, despite herself, a morbid curiosity overriding her diplomatic sensibilities. Oh, they got tired of fighting and signed a treaty. Then they started fighting other people instead. Humans are weird like that, We can't seem to sit still for very long. The crew exchanged terrified glances. This creature, this human, was casually describing century-long wars as if they were minor inconveniences, historical footnotes in a much larger, more chaotic narrative. But hey, Jake continued, completely unfazed by their reactions. At least we usually make up eventually, like my great-grandfather fought in World War II, and now I've got German and Japanese friends. We're pretty good at forgetting old grudges when there's food involved. World War II. Captain Grixel asked weakly, his nutrient paste forgotten. Oh, that was a big one. Global conflict lasted about 6 years. Pretty much everyone got involved. Nasty business, but we sorted it out. Jake pulled out a small device that looked suspiciously like a communicator. Want to see some pictures from my vacation to Japan last year? Beautiful country, amazing food. It's hard to believe we were trying to kill each other 80 years ago. The device displayed images of Jake standing next to various landmarks, smiling that terrifying human smile, completely oblivious to the fact that he was casually documenting his visit to a former enemy nation as if it were the most natural thing in the galaxy. You know what's funny? Jake said, scrolling through more pictures. I was talking to this old guy in Tokyo, and he told me about his grandfather who fought in the war. We compared stories about our grandfather's experiences, and then we went and got sushi together. Good sushi, too. Really fresh fish. By this point, the crew was staring at Jake with the kind of horrified fascination usually reserved for natural disasters. Here was a creature describing how his species had engaged in global warfare and then bonded with former enemies over consuming raw fish. Jake, Vexthera said carefully, her voice barely a whisper. Why are you telling us this? Oh, I just thought it might be helpful for the negotiations. I mean, if humans can figure out how to stop fighting and start being friends, maybe these Zephyrian and crystalline folks can, too. Sometimes people just need to sit down and have a good meal together. Jake stood up and stretched, his joints making small popping sounds that caused the entire crew to flinch. Speaking of which, is there a gym on this ship? I've been sitting for like 3 hours and I'm starting to get antsy. There's a fitness facility on Deck 7, Captain Grixel said automatically, his voice still tinged with disbelief. But it's not really designed for awesome, Jake said, cutting him off.